my screen, and then let's talk a little bit about PolicyMap. So yeah, thank you so much for just taking a little bit of time to learn about some of the new features of PolicyMap. Just a really quick note is we are still adding things to the features. So there are just a handful of things that we are currently finishing. It's going to be great once it's there. But I'm going to show you probably one of the newer things that you might see in PolicyMap. And then we'll cover some data sets that are probably brand new for the tool itself. If you aren't familiar, we do have what we call a new and legacy version of PolicyMap. And the meaning that the legacy is just our old version, only because we are still finishing a few pretty big things that are there, but you can always toggle between the two. And more importantly, those are mirrored. So if you use a data loader or you download data or do something unique in the legacy, it'll be available in the new version of PolicyMap, and vice versa. If you make a new map and custom region and such in the new version of PolicyMap, it'll be available in the legacy. And when we transition completely over to the new PolicyMap, all that will be available, so you don't lose anything on the other side. So let's show you some pretty cool features of the new PolicyMap. If you notice anything, the maps themselves are brand new, they're fluid, they're much faster. Some of the navigations are simplified on the right here. Otherwise, the searching is still the same, so we can still type in an address. You can type in, I can go to South Horn. Some of the underlying base maps have some unique customization. This is a lot of input from users because they want to customize the maps itself. And so that is this little gear on the bottom right here. And this gear will give you some different base maps to choose from. So this is a really neat function that allows you to basically maybe see data on top of a lighter shade, a terrain map, as well as a really pretty unique satellite map. And so understand that all the base maps, you can still add data on top of it. And that's really one of the neat functions of that feature itself. Other than that, though, you do have quite a bit of customization for the underlying data that is available in the map. So the goal of this is to simplify the map. A lot of times when you're trying to present data or present maps to somebody, those little things in the background might be overwhelming of data for the user. And so we give users quite a bit of control, allowing you to remove and add things that you might not need. And then we just added a really neat railroad and bus lines. So this allows you to add some rail lines. For now, understand the rail lines are mixed for both commercial and transportation. So it's something that we are doing a breakout eventually, but you do have at least the very least see all the different rail lines that come through a given area. A little bit of customization, including things like moving the names and such. And then with this data set, we also have all the bus lines. So in this case, you just have to zoom in a little bit. As you can see, eventually you'll see the lines fill out. So this is a really neat way for you to, at the very least, start visualizing limited access or access for users that are trying to get public transportation. Otherwise, if you are familiar with custom regions, they're still here. There are the same functions of making a custom region. If you're not familiar with it, they're basically the ability for you to make a custom boundary on the tool. So the 3 different ways are here, although we've added a couple of additional functionality with this. So the first way that you're probably more familiar with is the click to point, which is the ability just to click onto the map, and it drops the vertices of a target area. You can still pan around. You can still zoom in to get closer to the given area. But once you click onto a point to close it, it'll give you a chance to save that file. The neat thing about custom regions is that you can make multiple boundaries now within the same boundary. So this is a neat function because we have a lot of users that maybe have different regions that they're working in, or they're trying to draw multiple areas within the same project. So this allows them to do just that. And this also includes the ability to use the pencil function, and this is a simple just drag the map kind of feature. Give you many more vertices than to choose from. You can still assemble by other geographies. You can still make a radius report or a radius boundary itself. So if you're not familiar, this is the ability to basically either type in an address on the map and then specify how large the radius is. Or one of my favorite features is the ability to say, I want a 1 in 5 miles, and clicking onto the map will draw the centroid of it and then do a radius of your size. And you can adjust this at any time.
Bill, this is all amazing.
Oh, great.
We need an ooh and ah icon or something. We've got Roseanne Mirabella on the line, who discovered PolicyMap for Seton Hall, Matt Hale, Tim Hoffman from Political Science, Ann Hewitt from Public Health, and a lot of our library faculty. So this is amazing how much new functionality is in here.
Yeah, and then the best part of this was one of the limitations that we had previously was that once you make a boundary, you were stuck with it this time. We were just using an older technology. So the new function is that you can now edit custom regions. So that way, if you make a mistake or you come back to this, you can reshape it and say, this should have came out much further and covered this area instead. So this allows you to change boundaries and basically save what you created initially. And that's the same thing with the radius as well as the assemble feature.
That's fantastic.
And then probably one of the hidden features in the tool, which is a really big function for some of our professors that use the tool for different courses, was the ability to share this custom region. And the way the university function works is that you have 2 different types of shares. You can share it with individual students simply by entering your email address here, and it'll just simply plot the boundaries in their account, or with other faculty. But you can also then share it with the overall Seton Hall license, meaning that when somebody comes into the subscription, and I apologize, I should have logged into the Seton Hall subscription. But when somebody comes into the subscription tool, this link here where it says view my regions will list not only any custom regions that were just for your account, but for ones that were shared for the overall university. So it's a neat way for a faculty or professor, maybe starting the year or starting a project, to have some boundaries for students to work on initially, and then for them to pull that boundary and then be able to customize it and reshape it and such.
Okay, we just got a question. Can we use municipal boundaries?
Yes, of course. Yeah, so that's actually one of the other custom regions though. So this allows you to then, the assemble custom region allows you to take any boundaries that are in the tool and to make a new one out of. So initially it defaults to these common boundaries, but then from this you can say, you can use metros, state, city, localized boundaries. So now you can select the city, and it will basically aggregate the data for the cities itself, if you wanted to. Or you can make...
I think you're blowing Matt Hale's socks off.
So this will give you a chance to even make complex boundaries like tracks and such.
That's amazing.
The other thing about boundaries then is, if you are not familiar with all the different boundaries that we use in PolicyMap, this menu here was always in PolicyMap, but it was a little hidden. So this now gives you a list of all the different geographies that exist within the tool. And much of these geographies also have data aggregated to it somehow, with the exception of these 3 at the bottom. But otherwise, this list here is a really neat list for anyone that's not familiar with the census and how the data is published, but really how the census uses geographies as building blocks for aggregation. This list is a really neat way to see how that works. So I'll give you a really quick breakdown so you understand, to get some context for this. But the census that we do every 10 years, when they do publish the data, they do not publish individual information. They group people together into these geographies. And the smallest geography we have in PolicyMap for data is the block groups. And so this is a neat map that shows all these boundaries. We can remove this. And so each one of these little lines here represents, or these little boundaries, is a block group, which is about 400 to 1,500 people that are contained within that. And the reason for that, of course, is the density of population. So Now, as we get closer to Newark, it's much more dense. The housing is maybe row homes or stacked housings. There's less yards, but if we get more rural areas, the block groups are larger. And this is where it starts, with the census. So from here, a grouping of block groups form a census tract. And what you get is now, because you have the ability to customize the boundaries, you can really start showing how block groups are contained within census tracts. And so this is a really neat way to start showing how data is aggregated, first initially disseminated down to small geographies, but then how they're aggregated into these larger ones. So you can see how block groups make up a tract within that area.
Okay.
So this function actually wasn't available before because you didn't have the ability to customize the boundaries. So this is a neat way for users to be able to show how these boundaries are related to each other, but also how they are made up of each other.
And what about 2020 census data? Dr. Mirabella asked about that.
So the census generally publishes the data in the fall. So probably what you've heard is the congressional districting data. That always goes to Congress in May and June usually, and so that's probably who've heard most of the data. But otherwise, the census publishes nationally in the fall. So by then we'll have both boundaries as well as data in the fall, and probably have a lot of other things updated.
Fantastic.
Yep. Yeah. So one of the things you'll probably see a little bit is some of the years after these dates, and the reason for that is because of the whole concept of boundaries being built based on density of population. So with the next census, what happens is people move place to place, which then causes these block groups and tracts to shift its density of population. So the boundaries themselves actually get redrawn every 10 years. They actually get drawn every year with the ACS, but there's not a lot of data and it doesn't get shifted as much. But the decennial is the big one. So that's the cool thing about boundaries, a lot of really neat things. And we do have some more localized, unique boundaries. If you ever are doing work outside of the New Jersey area and you ever wanted any of these boundaries for Seton Hall University, let me know. We can put them all in there. We do a lot of work in Chicago. Of course, we're from Philadelphia, so we have a lot of Philadelphia boundaries here as well. We can add localized boundaries for Newark South, the Orange area. If you have a source for it, we're happy to pull the data in and put those in here.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think we would want to add that, and I can work with the faculty to find the best sources.
Yep. Yeah. Either send us a source, or if you have the data as a shapefile, so we can load it. But yeah, that's how a lot of these boundaries exist in here because of that. All right, let's talk about data, since it's probably one of the coolest features within the tool. If you're not familiar with the categories, they're pretty basic. I will send you a link that has a list of how the categories are summarized. One of the really important functions is this menu here, this list that I'll send everyone as well. We do run a tally of updated data, so that way if you just want to happen to see what's in the tool, this is a running list that updates that. So a lot of it is maybe outside of the scope of the work that you might do, but sometimes you might see something that's fairly new, you scan through there. So it's very short. It's a really quick, easy way to figure out maybe what data sets you're looking for. This page here is accessible from the support link in the very top as well. But otherwise, adding data, let me add a really simple one. We'll do something simple. There's a couple different ways to add data. The first is from the categories, and then the other is probably one of the much more efficient ways to get there, and it's simply using the search bar on the left, which allows you to use keywords. So that way, if you're looking for adult or insurance information, or income, or asthma, just a handful of keywords should generally get you to a data set that we should have available for you. Some pretty amazing metadata for our data. And then once you have the data on the map, you'll be able to visualize it and then do some really neat customizations. So we've simplified data layers on the map. So there's no titles or anything. The very simple thing is that you have a title of the data set right here in the legend. The eye icon will give you a longer description. And this is very helpful if you are using a piece of data and you just want to get more context of that data and really what it means and how we got to that data. So the asthma data, which is from one of my favorite data sets, which is the Versus data, which stands for the Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance data. Just a fantastic data set. So from this, while you get a lot of information about this particular data layer, I know a lot of students and professors really want to learn more about the data and where it comes from. So the See Data Directory link in the description here, or the Legend source link, will take you to our data library page. And on this page here, we'll give you a list of every data provider on the tool, which is way up here. But within each entry, we'll give you as much information as possible about that data. So where we pull the data from, the sources, the years, a lot of times the raw data that you can access, and then the description of the data. And in the case of Versus, it's actually really neat. It's one of our more customized data sets for our subscribers, because we worked with the census and the CDC to create a methodology to disseminate data down to much smaller geographies. So it worked out great. They really improved the process and the methodology, and then this will highlight some of the language that we got to it. But the legend, if you're not familiar, is basically how you read the data. So things like what the values of the colors on the map are, what the geographies are. But the legend is where you really do some amazing customization. And probably one of the biggest ones we added was the ability to isolate ranges. So this allows you to just show one range at a time or multiple ranges without having to make a custom map that shows one or two different ranges. This allows you to simply just isolate those values. But also, you can also edit the ranges by clicking edit, and this will show you a couple really important functions. The first is the histogram, which is brand new to the tool. And the reason for this is because the way data is created in PolicyMap, it's based on density where data contains or exists. So in the case of adults with asthma, it starts 6% based on methodology and caps at 17%. But it's saying that majority of the geographies that actually have data exist within this about 7% to maybe 10% range. So if you were to slide this bar way out there to 15 or to 14, you're not going to see a lot of places matching the dark purple because the extent starts so low in that process. So the histogram was a really neat addition because we understood how data was created and we wanted to share that data concept with a lot of our users.
Those are great. The sliding option for the numbers is fantastic.
Yeah, and of course you can always go in here and edit the numbers themselves. You can also change the numbers. There's a lot of times when you're presenting a map or presenting data, I always tell users sometimes keeping it simple really is the best option. And so reducing the ranges and minimizing the complexity of these numbers. So instead of saying 9.2%, you can say 8%, and you can say 10%. And it simplifies the message that you're presenting when you look at the map for the user. Some little things that are changed a bit for users, and let me get out of this one. I'm going to go into a different data set for us. So clicking onto the map still shows you the value of the place that you've selected, but also the benchmark of the geographies that it sits in. So the purpose of this is to give you some context of the area that you're looking at. So this track, while its income is in that kind of middle range from our ranges, compared to the zip code, it's a little higher. Compared to the county, it's a little lower, but compared to the state, it's much lower. And then the benchmarks in here also have trend charts for the multiple years available, which you can then take to a full trend chart. And this was a function that existed in PolicyMap before, but it was hidden because it was in our tables function. So now you can take this and see data across multiple years, but then also add other geographies and then compare how your place compares to the other geographies within the tool, which then of course is all exportable. So you can export the table, giving you a chance to present this very simple table that says, here's my places, here's my values. We can also download the data for that place. All right, I have 10 minutes, so let me show you one last thing feature-wise, and we're gonna go some really cool functions, which is a little bit of downloading data directly from the map. So the last thing I'm gonna show you is just points data set, just because there's a few unique updates to points, but generally it's still the same. Points are point data sets or address level data sets on the tool. You can still filter the points, which means that within each location, all this data that you see in a point data set, which is things like coverage pre-K all the way to 8th, total of 420 students, the enrollment, the demographics, all this piece of data are things that we created a filter that allows a user to say, I want to show just middle schools in the map. And then the filter allows them to just see the middle schools in that process. You can combine filters though. So in this case, you can say, I want to see middle schools and high schools at the same time. But probably one of the coolest features that we added to this point data set is the search function here. Allows you to query and basically limit the extent of the points, meaning that if I were to say, I want to see schools that have just Newark in its title, then what this does is it queries the title of the schools, and only schools that have Newark in the title will show. So this is a really neat way to take any of our point data sets and based on the extent of the map for you to whittle down to even a much more specific. In this way, you're using a keyword query instead of using a filter query. So the new function is pretty unique for that. All right. So let me show you one last couple things. And then from this, if you have any other questions, please add them. I'm happy to answer them. But otherwise, the last thing I want to show you is, of course, the ability to print the map is still the same, which is this little icon here. You still have a modal, which you had before. And the modal basically is exactly what you're going to export, meaning that this window that you see here is, you can still pan within the window. You can still zoom in. You can change the window itself by changing the orientation, adding margins, of course the formats, moving types and such. So all this is customizable, so that's exactly what you're going to export. But now we also had added this very unique function, which is the ability to clip data for just the area you're working in. So if I were to go to, let's say, what my custom region or my radius that I'm working on. So maybe I just want to show data for this particular area that I'm in. We added this really cool feature called the clip. And what this does is that it isolates the data for just the area. And it uses the 50% containment rule, meaning that at least 50% of the geography, which is tracked, need to sit within my boundary. Let me just And so the clip allows us to not only clip geographies, but as you can see, it also clips points too. So it's a really neat way to isolate the area that you're working in. And you can change this and say, let's see, this county is Essex County, right? So you can do this for any geography within the tool. So now you can isolate just Essex in that process, or custom regions and such. And all of this also then translates to a couple of things, which is the print will also then isolate that area. So this was one time called you're cutting a region in the print function, but now we simply allow you to clip that region to print. And then finally, one of the really unique features that we added to the clip itself is that you can then take this data and see it, all this stuff here, in a more traditional function, which is tables listed on the map. So remember, we had a tables function in PolicyMap. We had to travel from the maps page to tables and rebuild the table a little bit. But now we've added it simply in this function here, which then allows you to see a list of all the geographies that are contained just within my clipped area, which is the county, and the geography happens to be census tracts. And as you can see, if you highlight over the list of the tracts, it shows it on the map. And then the benefit of this is these two things are synced together. So if I were to change this from dollar amounts for income to the percent change, the two things are synced together, as well as even changing the year and the geography. So now instead of seeing tracks, it shows the zip codes in that process. And this clip is also for, this table is also for points too. So we can change this and say, if you have point data sets in the map, you can change it to show points. So now instead of showing zip codes in the map, in the tables, it's going to show us the schools that were highlighted. It gets a little busy. So I always tell users if you're trying to use this, it's definitely a better analytical tool to explain the data itself. But if you are trying to present this, definitely take smaller steps in that present, meaning that you might not always need to use points right away. You probably just want to do points and layers at a time, so that way the student or the person isn't overwhelmed with the amount of things that are happening in that. All right, so that's the bulk of really what I wanted to show. There are a lot of really neat data sets, depending on how you're looking in the tool-wise. There's probably one that I'm not sure if everyone has ever seen it, but it's probably one of the more exciting data sets, and that's the predominant race ethnicity index. And the reason for this is because if you ever look at race data from the census wants you to look at one race at a time. And then they've started adding some mixed races and even some non-white races. And those are great to look at overall, but sometimes you want to see how all the different races are mixed together. So because of that, I believe it was a New York Times article that created a methodology to show how these things could match together, and that's what we followed. It created this really neat map that shows that anything in a blue are areas that are predominantly white, anything in green are predominantly black, red is Hispanic, and then the purple is Asian. And the reason for this is a neat map that shows you, of course, the density of areas that might have predominantly one race or the other, but then more importantly, you start seeing these really neat areas that are mixed and are really blending together based on the geography that it sits in. So in this case, this place here, while the predominant race is Hispanic, it's not the majority. So it's actually mixed enough in that area. So the predominant race is a really neat one. And then that came about with these other two indexes from the same program. So you can see the field index and there's a whole methodology to this, but this one is a neat one. This is the probability that two individuals chosen at random would be of different races or ethnicities. And so this really helps a little bit with the predominant race. And again, if you are ever wanting to find out the methodology to this data set, you're always welcome to click onto the eye icon to see more data. So a really cool bit of demographic data within the tool that's being used. We have a lot of new housing data sets. Probably one of the most unique ones that we added recently is under lending actually, and it's actually mortgage loan denials. So if you were to combine this with, have you ever heard of redlining? We do have the redlining boundaries that are here. So this allows you to see, wow, all right, well, the Philadelphia's. This is the redline boundaries for your area. And of course with this, we have underlying lending data. So if you're familiar with some of the lending data, the mortgage loans data is a program called HMDA, which is the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act. It requires all sellers to report loans back to Congress. And the purpose for this, of course, is for making sure that loans or housing isn't being segregated and purchased. And then from that data set was a neat one, which was loan denials. You can start seeing where the concentration of loan denials occur from. It's an amazing map sometimes. So here's a really bad map to look at. As you can see, the areas that are the higher percentage of loan denials are in areas that have been previously redlined.
Phil, Dr. Hewitt is asking about the social vulnerability index.
Oh, sure. So that's under quality of life, and that is another data set. I believe we retrieved this from the CDC. Yeah. So this was basically a methodology from the CDC. And again, if you open this up, click onto that link, this will take you to the data directory. From this, it'll give you the methodology that we pulled to get there. But this is a fantastic data set from the CDC, because what they did was they took a handful of different indicators that would make a neighborhood or a place vulnerable, and they broke it out into these 4 very specific categories, and then they combined it together to make an overall score. So in this case, this is socioeconomic status, and if you click onto this, this will explain that this particular data set was based on people below poverty, unemployment, capita income, and then education. So those pieces of data together created an index, and then from there, the index was a high, so high vulnerable to low vulnerability. It's a fantastic bit of data, because you can see it individually, or you can see it all together. And so this, we actually pulled this data set in a really neat presentation for a group in Houston, because from this, they actually saw where there's high concentration of housing and low ownership of cars and access to public transit. And if you remember, there was a really big hurricane that hit Houston, and there's a flooded area neighborhood. Well, that map showed exactly that concentration of these persons that are vulnerable.
That's great. Phil, another question from Dr. Jory about, let's see, let me just scroll back from HRSA, the health professional shortage area.
I'm not familiar with that one. Let me just.
Health professional shortage area, yeah.
Does she know where it's at?
Yeah, HRSA, could we look, or there's health professionals. Does it give any shortage? Or would it be? HRSA is the, I think, the organization that produces the.
It's the HRSA data, but.
Yeah. You may, you know.
Vaccination. I apologize. I'm not familiar with that data set. So if I find it, I will get more information from my data team. I'll send you more information on it.
Okay. Could you show us instead medically underserved?
Yeah, of course.
Thank you.
That one is a couple different places. Let's see. So MUAs is a fantastic data set, which is not only being used, so it's being used in 2 different places. The HRSA index is a neat methodology that kind of ranks a place that are medically underserved. If you're not familiar with medically underserved, there's a variety of factors. A lot of it is things like mortality rates, access to care is probably one of the biggest ones, and the forced age in that group. So the score is how a place is determined, an MUA, but because MUAs themselves became a really important factor for a lot of CDC or CDFI work, they actually became a part of, became a part of its methodology. So now it's actually one of the key factors for a lot of federal programs. So is it a place considered medically underserved? So there's 2 different ways to look for medically underserved. As you can see, one is the HRSA one, which is the index, and then the other is the CDFI one. So just when you do look at this, just look at the breadcrumbs and see which one you want to use. Because the top one is this one here, and the bottom one is the index.
That's great.
Yeah, MUA is it's a really neat factor now that being added to a lot of federal programs.
What about in general, Phil, can you pull text data in there?
Yeah.
Like newspaper coverage, then that could break down and give you counts by municipality, something like that.
Are you looking for tax data or?
I think we had a question about just newspaper coverage in general. So if you looked at, if you had data, you know, and could PolicyMap ingest text and then spit out, you know, the highest coverage areas,
Right.
like that? Or is that more a more custom deal?
That's a pretty big. So that's the world of big data. It is something that we've found a couple of sources. So big data is things like Twitter and
Sure.
social media and of course print and such. And all that is actually an open API. And we found a couple of sources that have been able to disseminate that. They aggregate it and then they kind of disseminate it out to geographies and such.
Okay.
We are probably closer to be able to use that data in PolicyMap than we were with the old PolicyMap. So
Right.
I know one of these days, because the cell phone usage is one of the really cool data sets that we found. And of course, some of the big data stuff. So right now, unfortunately, probably not, but definitely
Okay.
we'll have it there.
All right. Thank you. No, these are all great questions. And we can definitely, it's great. We've got a lot of MHA faculty, public health faculty here. So we've got Dr. Jory, Dr. Hewitt, and Dr. Wagner from our interprofessional health program. And we've got our political science faculty. So we can, you know, we can certainly touch base with everyone if there's an assignment you want to create or something you want to do for your personal research. We can help you figure it out, and the library can collect data that you would like to potentially see added to PolicyMap.
Yeah, and then this resource, we have a pretty good resource from the support page. So again, this is from this link up here. And then from this, we have a couple of things like some quick guides, but this is the curriculum page that we have been curating for other professors that have published some of the classworks that use PolicyMap for. So if you ever wanted to access this is all available here as well.
Wonderful. That's great. And then if we requested, you know, data fill to be added, about how long does it take? If we sent you a shapefile or if it was publicly available?
It depends. It depends on the complexity of the data and its usability for the overall tool.
Okay.
So generally, our team takes about 2 weeks or so of research, and then most data doesn't take that long. But it really is about, we do a bit of a board process where we kind of vote on which data sets are added or not. And then,
okay.
Then it's never put away. It's always added to the next list as a review and such.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. Well, yeah, so everybody, if there are any more questions, you can ask them directly or put them in the chat. And please keep in mind, you know, reach out to your librarian if you want support with putting something together. And I think Marta Dayrup is on the call. And Marta, we can certainly plug the FIG grants, right? You're looking for applicants using technology in the classroom. Jump in if you want to say anything else about that, but definitely PolicyMap, I know, is eligible for those grants. So you can create something new and get a stipend for it. So.
And I'm happy to do another session maybe towards the end of the summer or such, beginning of the next semester, because by then we'll have some pretty big features. And so things like uploading data, downloading data and such. So we have to do another session as well.
Fantastic.
Lisa, could I comment just very quickly about the FIG grants?
Of course.
Thank you. The FIG grants are grants that are offered by TLTC. The deadline is June 30th, and you should have gotten, I think, in your mail a reminder of them. They're essentially grants that uses technology to improve your courses. And so there are a wide variety of tools. You'll work with an instructional designer and hopefully come up with a good product that's useful for you and for your students.
Absolutely. Thank you, Marta. Yeah, this is a perfect application of technology that you can use with those grants. Great. Any other questions? Last call. And yeah, Phil, definitely reach out when you know, the newest version is available, and we'll get this same group together. Yeah, so we've got thank yous in the chat. Very important tool for MHA from Dr. Wagner. So, and this has been a great core group that's been working with PolicyMap for many years now. So thank you all for making the time to come today.
Yes, thank you. And as we always talk about, we are a bunch of data people and we love data. So if you do run into a situation where you are looking for data that's not here, or you've heard of data that's really unique, we are always happy to listen to it and then do a bit of research to find out how to add it.
Which is great. It's exciting to be able to make an impact in a product that you're using in your class or for your research.
Yeah, a lot of our really new data sets have came from feedback from our teachers and users.
Great. All right, and Phil, we'll get a link to this recording that we can send out.
Yep.
Okay. Well, great. Thank you, everybody, so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. Have a great day.
You too. Thanks for your time, Phil.